Hi everyone, and welcome back to part 3, video number 3 of our tour of spreadsheets, introduction to spreadsheets and Microsoft Excel. This time we're going to talk about terminology. Hopefully you already had for the previous video, but please open up studentbudget.xlsx from the files section of our course website. Hopefully our facilitator today will have that website for you, but you should have that bookmarked already. That's a favorite. We want to keep coming back to that. Now, for just to mention that this one is called studentbudget.xlsx. If you're just used to Excel 2003 and versions prior to that, the file extension or the last 3 letters of the file name were just XLS. As of version 2007 and version 2010 as well, of course, they end with XLSX. The X is for, well, let's say extra, but it's the most recent version of the Excel spreadsheet file. Now, if you are creating spreadsheets in Excel 2010 and you want to send them to somebody who you know does not have Excel 2010, you can do this in 2 ways. So if you've created and you have the most recent version, but you know they have an older version, or perhaps they're using OpenOffice or a different spreadsheet which doesn't understand the XLSX format, you can do 2 things. Either if they have an old version of Excel, you can ask them to get something called the Microsoft Office Compatibility Pack. It's a free download from Microsoft, and it will let them, if they're using Word or Excel or PowerPoint, it will let them see, but not change, XLSX files or DocX files if it's a Word program, or PPTX is for PowerPoint, I think. Don't quote me on that one. I don't use PowerPoint a lot. And they'll be able to view them. They won't be able to edit them, but at least it'll come with a viewer so that they can view the most recent versions of the files. Or, if you have a file such as Student Budget here, XLSX, you can go to the File section, which is the backstage, and you can choose Save As, not Save. Save just saves it just in its current format. Save As pops open a button, Save As pop-up here, and you'll notice that it says here's the file name, XLSX, Student Budget. Save as type, though, we can choose something else. By default, it'll be Excel Workbook.xlsx, but I can also choose this version, Excel 97 to 2003 workbook. So that's the old version, the .xls files. Those ones are understandable by virtually any spreadsheet that you're going to run across, any spreadsheet program, such as OpenOffice, etc. OpenOffice can probably deal with XLSX files, but some of the features might not work exactly. So you can save it as that. Of course, you see I have a whole bunch of other formats to play with, most of which are just very plain text. We won't work with any of those, but and we don't need to. But you'll notice even in my case, I can actually save it as an OpenOffice, which is the free version of software that runs spreadsheets and word processing. It's called the Open Document Spreadsheet, or ODS. You'll see if you use OpenOffice or LibreOffice, you'll see that as an option too. But that's the way you can send a spreadsheet to somebody who doesn't have it. We'll look at other ways in a future class for people dealing with people who only have basic text, for instance. So we've opened up our spreadsheet. Here it is, Student Budget. Don't worry if we can't see everything quite yet, but now we're going to go through the terminology. And this is the terminology for spreadsheets universally, not just Microsoft Excel, but all of the other ones that you might run across. First of all, first and foremost is this idea of a cell. So I'm going to click here. That is a cell. Which cell? Each cell has a name. This cell happens to be called F5. And the name for any cell is the column letter followed by the row number. So that's it. If I click on this one, it happens to have a number in it, it's cell B5. It's column B, row 5. So all cells have an address or a name. We'll see that we can actually rename cells, and that turns out to be very powerful and very useful. But all cells have a name. This one is F7, G13, you'll see up at the left here, there's a place where it will actually tell you what the current name of the cell you're in is. And it's actually called the name box. We'll come back to the name box in a minute. This one that says car insurance is A13. Column A, row 13. The very first column of the entire spreadsheet is always A1, and the very last, or the first cell, I should say, of every spreadsheet is A1. The last cell may be far away, maybe a great distance from here, off to the right and down below, so we won't worry looking at that. But the last cell in, say, my table of figures is D15. You'll also notice whenever you click on a cell, the value that's in that cell will be reflected in what's called the formula bar, which we'll come back to. So it says money from home in cell A6. Yes, it does, money from home. I can't actually see it in the worksheet, in the spreadsheet quite yet, but there it is, called money from home. So there's a cell. A cell can contain three things. Most importantly, it can contain a number, and that's a number that you type in. 400 in the case of cell D4. 622.75 in the case of C5. Maybe it's formatted as a currency value with dollar signs and 2 decimal points. Maybe it's formatted as a percentage. It could be formatted many other ways, but it is a number that you typed in. The spreadsheet didn't calculate that. You typed that in. As we'll see later as well, dates and times are also numbers. But let's put that fact aside for a minute and come back to our cells, which can have a number. Cells can also contain a label such as September in cell C3 or salary in cell A4. Those are entered by me or you, whoever's creating the spreadsheet, and that's just text for our benefit. The spreadsheet doesn't use that to do any calculations like it might for numbers. So the spreadsheet ignores them entirely. So labels are just for us, not for the computer. And we have, for instance, travel in cell A10 is a label. So we can have numbers, we can have labels, and the final thing that we can have in a cell can only be three things. The final thing is something called a formula. And we'll wait. We don't have any formulas in this spreadsheet yet, so we'll wait a little bit until we get to formulas. But a formulas always start with an equal sign, and a formula means some sort of calculation. That's what spreadsheets are all about. They're all about those calculations. So we'll come back to formulas in a minute. But just those three things: labels, numbers, and formulas. That's all that can exist in a cell. A few more bits of terminology. We have entire rows, and in fact, if you click on the row number, say row 6 here I'm clicking on, that highlights the entire row from column A to column whatever's on the far right side. Maybe I'll scroll over a little bit and we'll see what happens. So it goes right through the whole alphabet, and then starts over AA, AB, and AC, and then so forth, on to BA, BC, BC, and so forth. It goes on quite a ways. In fact, in the current scheme of things, it used to be in the old version of Excel, you had 256 columns. Now it's up to, don't quote me, but I think it's 16,000 columns. For rows, it used to be you had 65,000, I believe, and now it's up to something like 4 billion. I've forgotten. I'm just going to do a quick check here. Oh, sorry, my mistake. It's only up to 1 million. Is it only a million, or is it a billion? Well, it's a large number anyway. More than we'll need for this course. So you're going to have lots of space. But an entire row, rows are always numbered. So here's row 10. And of course you can select an entire row by clicking on the row number. A column is vertical. So column C, columns are always lettered. So you can click on the column heading, and there'll always be a letter, C, column D, and so forth. The leftmost column is always column A. So rows and columns, the intersection of any row and column is a cell. There is also what's called a range, and a range is any rectangle of cells. So for instance, if this is, let's assume that this in column B I see my August income and expenses, column C is my September income and expenses, column D is for October income and expenses. What if I just want all my income? I don't really have this all formatted to highlight that this is income and the cells that are below are expenses, but I can sort of see those words, income and expenses. But using just the keyboard, just the mouse I should say, so I clicked and then I drag and then I let go of my mouse button and I selected a rectangular set of cells. That's what Excel calls a range. Any selection like that that's rectangular is a range, and really those are the easiest selections of the rectangular ones. And a range has a name, but it doesn't actually show up in the name box. Notice it's showing me B4, that's the cell I started with. Notice the highlight, wherever I start from, has a clear highlight. The other ones in this case have a blue highlight. Depending on your screen colors, you may have something different. But we can name our ranges easily. This one is, for these 9 cells, 3 by 3, is how many cells I have. 3 wide, 3 down. It has a name. We start at the top left, and we go to the bottom right. The top left cell is B4, the bottom right cell is D6, and when we write that, we say, we write it as the cell B4 colon D6. Now, we wouldn't actually ever write a cell like this. I'm just writing this on the screen so you can see it. I would probably normally draw that out on the board, but that range that I just selected over here is B4 colon D6, top left through bottom right. Let's say if I wanted all my August and September expenses, so just August and September, it would be this range, starting at cell B9 and going all the way down to C15. Top left, bottom right, so that range would be written B9 colon C15. It doesn't actually matter if you type it in uppercase or lowercase. We'll see later. Lowercase is fine, saves you hitting the shift key, so why not do that? But just for example, I wrote it out here. So this range here is B9 colon C15. Even if I had selected backwards, so I'll click down here, I'll click this way, so I'll draw it out that way. It's still B9 C colon C15, even though I started at the bottom right. Always top left to bottom right. What if my range, what if I want just my October figures? The range is only 1 column wide, same rule applies. Top left to bottom right. Well, there's no left or right, so the top left is D4, the bottom right, and I'll write this without capitals, D4, the bottom right in that case would have been D15. That's perfectly acceptable. It's a rectangle of cells, it's a range, it still has a name, top left to bottom right. In this case, just top to bottom. D4 colon D15. If I just wanted my rent for 3 months, that's a range. Top left to bottom right. Well, there is no top, there is no bottom, so it's just left to right. B14 through BD14. So that one would be written B14 colon D14. Same row, just 3 columns in that single row. So that's what this range is. So we'll be using ranges frequently. It's a very powerful mechanism for doing calculations on a whole bunch of numbers together. It makes things very easy, but all of our ranges will have this naming scheme. Top left colon bottom right cell. Now, I'll just get rid of these because these are cluttering up, and normally we wouldn't write such things in a spreadsheet. That's just for demonstration. So I'll select that range, which happens to be what? Top left to bottom right, F5 colon F14. I can also see from this highlighting over here which rows and which columns I've selected. And I hit the delete key just then, or the backspace, to get rid of what I had there. So that's a range. So we have cells, rows, columns, ranges. We also have something called a worksheet, and most of the time we'll be working with just one worksheet. But there can be many, and in fact I'm not sure what even the limit was. It used to be 256. Again, one of those power of 2 numbers we've already seen a few times in the past couple of classes. Comes back to haunt again. But worksheets are down here at the bottom. By default, you'll get 3. It'll be sheet 1, sheet 2, and sheet 3. And it's like 3 different spreadsheets, although in Excel, we call them worksheets. In different spreadsheet programs, they may be called spreadsheets. They may just be called sheets or tabs or something. But we get 3. We can create new ones by clicking on the little icon for new. But for most of our work, we'll just be using 1, and when we get to charts is when we'll see more. But we'll see examples of when we have multiple worksheets. That's when you may have different calculations. This is a student budget. Perhaps you also want to keep track of car loan figures, but separately. Maybe you'd use a separate sheet for just your car loan. It will all be together in one file, studentbudget.xlsx in this case, and that whole file, which is a collection of worksheets, is called a workbook. And a workbook is just a file that ends in .xlsx for our purposes. So a workbook, it's made up of many sheets, like a book is made out of many sheets of paper, and each sheet has rows and columns and cells, etc. A couple of other pieces of of terminology, which we've already run across. But we have the name box, which is here at the top left before we get to the ribbon. Just below the ribbon, that's called the name box. Normally, when you select a cell, that's what you're going to see in the name box. You're going to see the name of that cell. But in some cases, as we'll see in a video in a few minutes, we can also give our own names to cells, and that turns out to be very useful for special cells. We also have over here on the right, just to the right of the name box, is something called the formula bar. Now, when we enter things into our formula bar and into our cells, and we might as well do that now. If you want to enter a value into your cell, you can do it. You can do it in a couple ways. You can click on the cell and just start typing. So let's say I want to type in a number. 1975, the height of the disco era. I can just start typing if it's an empty cell like that. And I can hit enter or any of the arrow keys to move somewhere else or click somewhere else with the mouse. That will be stored in the cell. It's also in the formula bar. I can click on a cell, and instead of just typing it directly, I can click in the formula bar and enter something. Maybe I want to hit a label this time. Disco era for my 1975. Oops, era. I can hit enter when I'm done, or click the little checkbox, which is the same as hitting enter. Enter also moves your cursor usually to the next cell, either down or to the right, depending on a setting. So those are ways of entering new values into cells. If you want to edit an existing cell, I can double click it, and so 598.11, I can change that to 598.12. Hit enter when I'm done. If I want to undo what I've just made, of course, here's the undo quick access button. So it says undo typing there. It even tells me what it's going to do. I'll undo it, and it goes back to 598.11. So if you make a mistake, you can use this little undo arrow. The shortcut for undo is always Control Z. That's very Windows wide. Command Z on the Mac. If I want to delete what's in a cell, I'll just select it and hit, you didn't see that there, but I hit the delete key on my keyboard. Or the backspace key will work as well. So there's the name box and the formula bar. We'll get to formulas a little bit later, but it's nice, gives you lots of space, more space than you normally see in a cell for editing formulas. When we come back, our next video will be getting around in a spreadsheet, navigation. See you then.